That's very kind. Thank you very much. I'd like to dedicate this lecture to the memory of George W. Barlow, a long-term faculty member here who recruited me here for my very first job as an extremely junior assistant professor, and was my guide and mentor during the time I was here. Can I begin with a little bit of research? The website in the middle there, richarddawkins.net, could I just have a show of hands for the number of people who've been there? Okay. Thank you. All right, that's fine. Thank you very much. Isn't it a remarkable coincidence? Almost everyone has the same religion as their parents. It always just happens to be the right religion. Religions run in families. If we'd been brought up in ancient Greece, we'd all be worshipping Zeus and Apollo. If we'd been born Vikings, we'd be worshipping Wotan and Thor. How does this come about? Well, of course, through childhood indoctrination. One by one, those ancient belief systems have vanished from the face of the earth, and we seem to get on just fine without them. Zeus with his thunderbolts, Apollo, Wotan, Thor with his hammer, Baal, Mithras, and Amun-Ra, all were once worshipped as gods. People believed in them, prayed to them, sacrificed to them. Children were brought up with them, told of their existence as a matter of undoubted fact. But nowadays, everybody agrees that no matter how sincere those believers undoubtedly were, they were deluded. Every one of those gods was a delusion, and so were countless other gods that human tribes have sincerely believed in all around the world. Some of us just go one god further. My book is called The God Delusion, and I need to make it clear that the God I'm talking about is a personal, intelligent, creative being, like Yahweh, Allah, Baal, Wotan, Zeus, or Lord Krishna. But if by God you mean nature, goodness, the universe, the laws of physics, the spirit of humanity, or Planck's constant, we're going to be talking at cross purposes. An American student asked her professor whether he had a view about me. Sure, he replied, he's positive science is incompatible with religion, but he waxes ecstatic about nature and the universe. To me, that is religion. Well, if that's what you choose to mean by religion, fine, that makes me a very religious man. But if your God is a being who designs universes, listens to prayers, forgives sins, wreaks miracles, reads your thoughts, cares about your welfare or your sex life, and raises you from the dead, then you're unlikely to be satisfied. As the distinguished American physicist Steven Weinberg said, if you want to say that God is energy, then you can find God in a lump of coal. But I would add, don't expect congregations to flock to your church. This is sometimes called pantheistic religion. I call it Einsteinian religion. When Einstein said, did God have a choice in creating the universe, he meant, could the universe have begun in more than one way? God does not play dice was Einstein's poetic way of doubting Heisenberg's indeterminacy principle. Einstein did not believe in God. He did not believe in a personal God. He was irritated when people said that he did. But what did he expect? The hunger to misunderstand should have been palpable to him. Religious physicists, if you meet one, usually turn out to be so only in the Einsteinian sense. They are atheists of a poetic disposition, and so am I. But given the widespread yearning for that great misunderstanding, deliberately to confuse Einsteinian pantheism with supernatural religion is an act of intellectual high treason. Another example of Einsteinian religion, the Indian-American Nobel Prize-winning physicist Subramanian Chandrasekhar said, "This shuddering before the beautiful, this incredible fact that a discovery motivated by a search after the beautiful in mathematics should find its exact replica in nature persuades me to say that beauty is that to which the human mind responds at its deepest and most profound. The American physicist John Wheeler said, "We will grasp the central idea of it all as so simple, so beautiful, so compelling, that we will all say each to the other, 'Oh, how could it have been otherwise? How could we all have been so blind for so long?'" Don't forget, by the way, with all this talk of aesthetic beauty, beauty isn't enough. It must also be true. And that comes, finally, to evidence. Beauty may be a good guide to the stage of science where we put forward hypotheses, but those hypotheses must finally be tested. Carl Sagan said this, How is it that hardly any major religion has looked at science and concluded this is better than we thought? The universe is much bigger than our prophets said, grander, more subtle, more elegant. Instead, they say, no, 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 my God is a little God, and I want him to stay that way. A religion, old or new, that stressed the magnificence of the universe as revealed by modern science might be able to draw forth reserves of reverence and awe hardly tapped by the conventional faiths. Sooner or later, such a religion will emerge. Einsteinian religion, pantheistic religion, does not involve belief in anything supernatural. The pantheistic God doesn't exist, except in a purely poetic sense. Of those people who do believe in a supernatural God, many make a distinction between deism and theism. The deistic God designs the laws of physics and then retires never to be heard from again. Certainly not interested in human affairs. The theistic, interventionist God, there he is, he's parting the Red Sea there. He intervenes in the world, intervenes in human affairs, performs miracles, answers prayers, and all that other list of things that I gave you earlier. There are many people who call themselves agnostic, and I want to clarify this. It's rather a confusing term. I put up here a scale of religiosity from 1 to 7, where 1 is, I know there is a God, and 7 is, I know there is no God, and we've got a scale of intermediate agnostic positions in between. 4 is exactly 50%. Number 4, agnostic, believes that the probability of God existing and not existing is exactly equal. Number 2 is, I don't exactly know there's a God, but I have a very high probability, I believe in a very high probability of there being a God. I'm a de facto theist. I can't know for certain, but I strongly believe in God and live my life on the assumption that he's there. And number 6, at the other end, is somebody who believes there's a very low probability of God existing, but still not quite 0. I'm a de facto atheist. I can't know for certain, but I think God is very improbable, and I live my life on the assumption that he isn't there. I'm a number 6. I'm an agnostic, but with the same level of belief in God as I have belief in fairies or unicorns. Bertrand Russell illustrated this with his parable of the celestial teapot. He pointed out that it is impossible to disprove the hypothesis that there is a china teapot in orbit around Earth, or around the Sun, between the orbits of Earth and Mars. We therefore all have to be agnostic about the teapot theory, but in practice we are all a-teapotists. I want to make it clear that the agnostic position does not, should not, be confused with an exact 50-50 probability position. There are people who quite wrongly and illogically say, you can neither prove nor disprove the existence of God, therefore there's an exactly 50% probability of God existing. It's like tossing a penny. That, of course, is completely illogical. Just because you cannot disprove something, and the teapot example shows that, it doesn't mean the odds of it being there are 50%, and you can quickly see that with the example of the teapot. I regard the hypothesis of the existence of God as a scientific hypothesis. And in this I disagree with many of my scientific colleagues who feel that science and religion have absolutely nothing to do with each other, and you can be a perfectly good scientist while your religious belief is a purely private matter that has nothing whatever to do with your science. I think that's wrong, because a universe with a God would be a completely different kind of universe from one without, and the difference would be a scientific difference. God, by the way, could clinch the matter in a heartbeat in his favor if he chose to intervene, for example, at this very moment. The only one of the traditional arguments for God that is still widely used today is the teleological argument, sometimes called the argument from design. It's the famous watchmaker argument. Surely one of the most superficially plausible bad arguments ever discovered. And it's rediscovered by just about everybody until they learn the logical fallacy of it and/or they learn Darwin's brilliant alternative. In the familiar world of human artifacts, things like watches, computers, complicated things that look designed are designed. To naive observers, it seems to follow that similarly complicated things in the natural world that look designed, things like eyes and hearts, are designed too. This is not just a bad argument by analogy, it's a bad argument by statistical reasoning as well. It's fallacious, but it carries an illusion of plausibility. If you randomly scramble the fragments of an eye or a heart 1,000,000 times, you probably won't hit on one that can see or pump. This demonstrates that such devices could not have been put together by chance, by random chance. And there are many people who think that the only alternative to random chance is design, because of the lamentable scientific education of most British and American students. There are many people who simply don't know what Darwinian natural selection is, and therefore the only alternative to chance that many people can imagine is design. The English astronomer Sir Fred Hoyle dramatized his own version of that misunderstanding. He suggested that a hurricane blowing through a junkyard would be as likely to assemble by luck a Boeing 747 as that natural selection could put together life as we know it. Even before Darwin came along and gave us the answer, the impotence of the argument from design was glaring. How could it ever have been a good idea to postulate as an explanation for the existence of complex, improbable things a designer who would have to be even more complex and improbable than that which he's being invoked to explain? The entire argument is an obvious logical non-starter, as the great philosopher David Hume realized before Darwin was born. But what Hume didn't know was the supremely elegant alternative to both chance and design that Darwin was to give to us. Natural selection is so stunningly powerful and elegant. It not only explains the whole of life, it raises our consciousness and boosts our confidence in science's future ability to explain probably everything else. Essentially, what's wrong with creationism, stroke intelligent design, there's no difference, by the way, is that it is what the philosopher Daniel Dennett calls a skyhook. A skyhook is a great hand that comes out of the sky, unexplained, and starts manipulating things in the world. And superficially, it looks as though this great hand is explaining something. But of course it explains nothing, because it lacks an explanation itself. That's a skyhook. The opposite of a skyhook is a crane. A crane really does do explanatory work. Natural selection is the crane par excellence. Natural selection is cumulative. It starts from simple beginnings and works up by gradual degrees, incremental degrees, to the prodigious heights of complexity and improbability that we see in the living world. Here's a couple of examples of the products of natural selection, of the great crane of cumulative natural selection. On the right is a rose thorn, an adaptation by roses to avoid being eaten, and that thorn has been carved and shaped by natural selection over many generations. On the left, those are not rose thorns, those are bugs. They too have been carved and shaped by natural selection into the shape of a rose thorn as protection against their own predators. Natural selection is not just an alternative to chance, it's the only ultimate alternative to chance that's ever been suggested. Design is a workable alternative, but only in the short term, because you still have to explain where the designer came from. Francis Crick and Leslie Orgel, distinguished molecular biologists, once playfully speculated that life on this planet may indeed have been designed. This is their theory of directed panspermia, whereby an alien intelligence from outer space seeded our planet with a rocket in whose nose cone were bacteria. And that's where all of life sprang from. They didn't really believe that, but they put it forward as an interesting hypothesis. It's interesting from my point of view because I see nothing wrong with it. It could be right. It seems to be very unlikely, but it could be right. But whatever else you can say, it cannot be the ultimate explanation, because you still have to explain where the alien intelligences from outer space came from. Sooner or later, that regress has got to be terminated. If the aliens from outer space were themselves seeded by another rocket from a different planet, you still haven't solved the problem. Finally, you've got to terminate the regress by postulating a crane instead of a skyhook. And the obvious crane would be evolution by natural selection. The logic of creationist arguments is always the same. Some natural phenomenon is too statistically improbable, too complex, too beautiful, too awe-inspiring to have come into existence by chance. Design is the only alternative to chance that the author can imagine. Therefore, design must have done it. And science's answer to this faulty logic is also always the same. Design is not the only alternative to chance. Natural selection is a better alternative. Notice what rotten logic it is. We have theory A and theory B. Theory A is supported by loads of evidence. Theory B is supported by no evidence at all. Now here's the key step in the argument. 4. I can't understand how theory A explains phenomenon X. Therefore, theory B must be right. I bet you don't know how the elbow joint of the lesser-spotted weasel frog evolved. You don't? Right then, God did it. This kind of argument is a failure of the imagination. I've described it as the argument from personal incredulity. A metaphor for extreme improbability is a combination lock. A very good, high-quality combination lock of the kind that they put on bank vaults. A bank robber could theoretically get lucky and hit upon the right combination and therefore get all the money in the bank. But in practice, combination locks, at least the ones in bank vaults, are designed with enough improbability to make this tantamount to impossible, as unlikely as Fred Hoyle's spontaneous coming into existence of a Boeing 747. But now imagine a badly designed combination lock. One that gives little hints, a bit like the childhood game of Hunt the Slipper, where you say, getting warmer, getting warmer, getting warmer, getting warmer, getting cooler, getting warmer, getting warmer. Suppose that Each time you turn the dial and you get a little bit closer to the correct combination, suppose that the bank vault door creaks open just a chink, and a little bit of money spills out. The dribbling combination lock, which of course the bank robber would instantly home in on the jackpot if he had that sort of clue. The dribbling combination lock is a better analogy for Darwinian evolution than the real bank lock, which offers only two possibilities, the jackpot or nothing. And the trouble with creationist arguments is that they all think that evolution by natural selection is a jackpot or nothing argument. Nothing could be further from the truth. But God, the God theory, on the other hand, really is a jackpot or nothing argument, because God is postulated as being there from the beginning, before the process of evolution got going. I can imagine godlike beings, like the ones that Crick and Orgel postulated as seeding life from their planet to ours. I can imagine godlike beings, such that if we ever met them, I mean, if they came here, for example, in order to have got here, they would have to be godlike, because for sure we couldn't get there. I mean, they need to be technological wizards of a sort that we have no comprehension of. We would worship them as gods, but they would not be gods, because ultimately they would have evolved by a gradual process. But the God of the Old Testament, the God of the New Testament, the God of the Muslims, who's always been there, he is the ultimate 747. Well, why not teach the controversy? There are real controversies in science. They're interesting, and we should certainly teach them. It's a very important part of scientific education to understand that science is not a done deal, that scientists are constantly changing their minds as new evidence comes in. That's important. So let's by all means teach controversies that really are proper scientific controversies. But the controversy over so-called intelligent design versus evolution is just not a real controversy at all. I hope it's not pure wishful thinking to suggest that there is a new wave of reason sweeping across America, Britain, the whole of the Western world. One indication of this, perhaps, is a wave of best-selling books, which I'm happy to advertise. And perhaps even more significant is the backlash, and I invite you to count along. Three, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. The flea allusion you will of course recognize from W.B. Yeats, but was there ever dog that praised his fleas? Hence the flea powder that just got rid of that. And a nice little afterthought. You may not have seen the British edition, but that's a copy of the cover design of the British edition of The God Delusion. I'm not trying in this lecture to teach facts, and I'm certainly not trying to indoctrinate. I'm trying to raise consciousness. And we've all met the phrase consciousness raising in the context of feminism. It's especially powerful. There's no law against using a phrase like the rights of man or one man, one vote. Yet because we've all had our consciousness raised by feminists, most of us feel kind of uneasy when we hear people use a phrase like one man, one vote. And even those who still use man in that sort of sentence do so with their consciousness raised. They know what they're doing. They're taking a stand for traditional language, perhaps, or trying deliberately to rile feminists. But everybody, on one side or the other, has had their feminist consciousness raised. And I want to raise our consciousness about some unconscious assumptions we all make about religion. Let me try a little experiment on you. At Christmas time one year, my newspaper in Britain, The Independent, was looking for a seasonal picture, and they found a heartwarmingly ecumenical one at a school nativity play. The three wise men were played by Shadbreet, a Sikh, Musharraf, a Muslim, and Adele, a Christian, all aged 4. Now my guess is that you probably think that picture's rather sweet. How nice that 4-year-olds who belong to different religions should come together in a nativity play. Now suppose the caption said this: Shadbreet, a socialist, Musharraf, a conservative, and Adele, a liberal, all aged 4. Shadbreet, an atheist, Musharraf, an agnostic, and Adele, a secular humanist, all aged 4. I'm trying to raise consciousness. I hope that that series of 3 slides has raised your consciousness. I hope that every time from now on you hear anybody talking about, say, a Catholic child, or a Protestant child, or a Muslim child, you will protest. You will say, you wouldn't talk about a postmodernist child, or a Keynesian child, or a Hayekian monetarist child. There is no such thing as a Catholic child. There's only a child of Catholic parents. There's no such thing as a Protestant child. Only a child of Protestant parents. There's no such thing as a Muslim child. Only a child of Muslim parents. I repeat these slogans over and over again, probably too often. Too often? It can't be too often when you're in the business of consciousness raising. Please join me in protesting every time you hear anyone ever referring to a Catholic child, a Christian child, a Muslim child, etc. I like to think that this particular piece of consciousness raising has had some effect. I'm now going to play you a short 3-minute extract from a British comedian called Marcus Brigstock, and it's quite funny. I hope you don't mind if I hope you don't take offence too. At the end of this monologue, somebody's put sort of pictures onto it as well. I think it must originally have been on radio. At the end, I hope you'll get the same consciousness raising point that I've just made. So I'll start I hope the sound will come through.
I'd like to start this week with a request, and this one goes out to the followers of the 3 Abrahamic religions, to the Muslims, Christians and Jews. It's just a little thing really, but do you think that when you've finished smashing up the world and blowing each other to bits and demanding special privileges while you do it, do you think that maybe the rest of us could sort of have our planet back? I wouldn't ask, but the thing is, I'm starting to think there must be something written in the special books each of you so enjoy referring to that tells you it's all right to behave like precious, petulant, pugnacious pricks. Forgive the alliteration, but your persistent power-mad punch-ups are pissing me off. It's mainly the extremists, obviously, but not exclusively. It's a lot of mainstreamers as well. Let me give you an example of what I'm talking about, okay? Muslims. Listen up, my bearded and veily friends. Calm down, okay? Stop blowing stuff up. Not Stop blowing stuff up. Not everything that's said about you is an attack on the Prophet Muhammad and Allah that needs to end in the infidel being destroyed. Have a cup of tea, put on a Cat Stevens record, sit down and chill out. I mean, seriously, what's wrong with a strongly worded letter to the Times? Christians, you and your churches don't get to be millionaires while other people have nothing at all. They're your bloody rules. Either stick to them or abandon the faith. And stop persecuting and killing people you judge to be immoral. Oh, and stop pretending you're celibate as a cover-up for being a gay or a nonce. Right, that's 2 ticked off. Jews. I know you're God's chosen people and the rest of us are just whatever, but when Israel behaves like a violent, psychopathic bully and someone mentions it, that doesn't make them anti-Semitic. And for the record, your troubled history is not a licence to act with impunity now. So, when the letters come, and I'm guessing they will, I can guarantee that each one of those faiths will be utterly convinced that I've singled them out for special criticism.
Why did it have to be us? Islam is a peaceful faith.
I don't see what's wrong with being Christian. We're a peaceful, loving faith.
How dare you, after all we've been through? We Jews know how terrible violence can be.
You see, all of them will be convinced that they're the ones being picked on. The Abrahamic faiths are like Scousers. They're always convinced they're a bit harder than everyone else. Right, and why is it that all of these faiths claim to be peaceful when even the most fleeting glance at a history of warfare will tell you otherwise? The relationship between religion and warfare is very similar to the relationship between ant and deck. You could have one without the other, but I'm not sure anyone would see the point. I wouldn't actually like it, but it would at least be refreshing to hear one of them come out and say,
Oh, our faith's violent as you like. We'll have a scrap, us lot, we do. Honestly, our special book says fight, fight, kill, maim, fight, smash, destroy, fight, murder, kill, and fight. That's why I signed up, to be honest. I'm a bit naughty, know what I mean?
But no, all of them claim to be peaceful religions. Yeah, peaceful right up to the point where someone takes something they think is theirs, or says the wrong thing, or looks at them funny, then it's fighty, smashy, kicky, punchy all the way. I know this will upset a lot of people, and frankly, I don't care. I'm getting so sick of religious people screwing it up for the rest of us. Please don't kill us. Seriously. As far as I'm concerned, this is the only chance we get. When we die, it's all over. There's no virgins and pearly gates waiting for us, no big beardy man saying...
Right, so how do you think that went then? Bit mixed? Killed a lot of people in my name, I see. Yeah, not really what I had in mind, actually. Tell you what, have another go as a worm.
While we're at it, I'm sick of religious people forcing their children to define themselves by their parents' faith. A 4-year-old is no more a Christian than he is a member of the Postal Workers Union.
A fair working wage, decent working conditions, and time allotted to see the new Transformers film.
Said a spokesman.
Another piece of consciousness raising. You've all seen maps of the world showing what people believe in different places. In the blue area, they're Catholic. In the red area, they're Protestant. In the orange area, they're Eastern Orthodox. In the green area, they're Sunni, Muslim, and so on. And we all take that perfectly for granted. It seems entirely natural that people's opinions about the cosmos, about morality, about humanity, should depend upon the accident of geography where they happen to have been born. Suppose scientists worked like that. Take a difficult and interesting scientific issue. Take, for example, the question of what made the dinosaurs go extinct. Was it an asteroid hitting the Earth? Was it a comet? Was it the rise of the mammals? Was it a plague of viruses? All these different theories have something going for them. In the blue area, the scientists all believe that it was a meteorite. In the red area, they believe it was a comet. In the orange area, a virus plague. In the green area, the eggs of the dinosaurs were all eaten, etc. I hope yet again to have raised consciousness. We all take for granted that it's okay for religion to be distributed geographically in that kind of way. And yet we immediately see, when I show you a map like this, how totally ridiculous that is? Why do we all accept it as though it were natural and sensible and the way things should be? Here's another exercise in consciousness raising, again using the example of the scientific controversy over what made the dinosaurs go extinct. The Quarterly Review of Biology is a journal in which biologists publish their findings, their research. I have edited an imaginary spoof issue of the Quarterly Review of Biology devoted, as they sometimes are, to a particular topic, namely the topic, did an asteroid kill the dinosaurs? The first paper would be a perfectly respectable and normal scientific paper. Iridium layer at KT boundary and potassium argon dated crater in Yucatan indicate that an asteroid killed the dinosaurs. Nobody would be surprised to see a paper like that in any scientific journal. The President of the Royal Society has been vouchsafed a strong inner conviction that an asteroid killed the dinosaurs. It has been privately revealed to Professor Huxtane that an asteroid killed the dinosaurs. Professor Haldley has been brought up to have total and unquestioning faith that an asteroid killed the dinosaurs. Professor Hawkins has promulgated an official dogma binding on all loyal Hawkinsians that an asteroid killed the dinosaurs. Professor Huxtane is personally offended by all strident, shrill and polemical denials that an asteroid killed the dinosaurs. Professor Hallux derives deep personal comfort from his belief that an asteroid killed the dinosaurs. The President of the National Academy of Sciences has issued a fatwa I'm now going to switch gears and look at a couple of criticisms that the hardback God Delusion encountered, and I've mentioned these in the preface to the paperback, which is now just out. Interestingly, some of the strongest criticisms came from atheists who, although they don't believe themselves, believe in belief, as the philosopher Dan Dennett puts it. I'm an atheist, but I wish to dissociate myself from your shrill, strident, intemperate, intolerant, ranting language. Well, actually, if you look at the language of the God Delusion, it's rather less shrill or intemperate than we regularly take in our stride when listening to political commentators, for example, theatre critics or book critics or restaurant critics. Here are some quotes from restaurant criticisms of London restaurants in the leading papers recently. It is difficult, if not impossible, to imagine anyone conjuring up a restaurant, even in their sleep, where the food in its mediocrity comes so close to inedible. All things considered, quite the worst restaurant in London, maybe the world, serves horrendous food grudgingly in a room that is a museum to Italian waiters' taste, Kirker 1976. The worst meal I've ever eaten, not by a small margin, I mean the worst, the most unrelievedly awful. What looked like a sea mine in miniature was the most disgusting thing I put in my mouth since I ate earthworms at school. Well, insulting a restaurant might seem trivial compared to insulting God, but restaurateurs and chefs really exist, and they have feelings to be hurt. Whereas blasphemy, as the witty bumper sticker puts it, is a victimless crime. Another example. In 1915, the British Member of Parliament Horatio Bottomley recommended that after the war, if by chance you should discover one day in a restaurant you were being served by a German waiter, you will throw the soup in his foul face. If you find yourself sitting at the side of a German clerk, you will spill the inkpot over his foul head. Now that's strident and intolerant, and I should have thought ridiculous and ineffective as rhetoric, even in its own time. The British literary critic Terry Eagleton described the late Kingsley Amis, extremely distinguished novelist, as a racist, anti-Semitic bore, a drink-sodden, self-hating reviler of women, gays and liberals. Well, I think that compares fairly well with my own beginning of chapter 2 of The God Delusion, which is the passage most often quoted as strident or shrill. The God of the Old Testament is arguably the most unpleasant character in all fiction. Jealous and proud of it, a petty, unjust, unforgiving control freak, a vindictive, bloodthirsty ethnic cleanser, a misogynistic, homophobic, racist, infanticidal, genocidal, filicidal, pestilential, megalomaniacal, sadomasochistic, capriciously malevolent bully. Now, that's the passage most often quoted as strident or shrill. It's not for me to say whether I succeeded, but my intention was closer to robust humour, a humorous broadside, rather than shrill polemic. I don't think words like misogynistic, infanticidal, genocidal, megalomaniacal, that doesn't sound shrill to me. Something about those long words suggests that... My wife Lala and I do a sort of double act reading from my books when they're published. And one of the things you have to do in order to warm an audience up is to get them laughing early. And so with each book we try to pick a humorous passage near the beginning, and we always pick that passage for The God Delusion. It sort of gets a laugh. As this one is another one, which at least it was my intention to be humorous, about Our Lady of Fatima. There you see some typical examples of Catholic kitsch. This is a quote from The God Delusion now. Pope John Paul II created more saints than all his predecessors of the past several centuries put together, and he had a special affinity with the Virgin Mary. His polytheistic hankerings were dramatically demonstrated in 1981 when he suffered an assassination attempt in Rome and attributed his survival to intervention by Our Lady of Fatima. A maternal hand guided the bullet. One cannot help wondering why she didn't guide it to miss him altogether. Others might think the team of surgeons who operated on him for 6 hours deserved at least a share of the credit. But perhaps their hands too were maternally guided. The relevant point is that it wasn't just Our Lady who, in the Pope's opinion, guided the bullet, but specifically Our Lady of Fatima. Presumably Our Lady of Lourdes, Our Lady of Guadalupe, Our Lady of Medjugorje, Our Lady of Akita, Our Lady of Zaitun, Our Lady of Garabandal, and Our Lady of Knock were busy on other errands at the time. I think that's quite funny too. Pure Monty Python. Nevertheless, it's quite true that many people do feel very strongly about their faith and very offended if you insult it. We've come to expect never to be offended. What you say is offensive to me. The novelist Douglas Adams, to whom The God Delusion is dedicated, picked out exactly what's going on here in a wonderful speech, an impromptu speech that he made in Cambridge not long before he died, and I was privileged to be there. Fortunately, somebody had the blessed good sense to switch on a tape recorder, and so this priceless hour or so of Douglas just holding forth impromptu is preserved. And I'm going to read a passage from it, because he puts his finger exactly on what's going on with all this offence. Religion has certain ideas at the heart of it which we call sacred or holy or whatever. What it means is, here is an idea or a notion that you're not allowed to say anything bad about. You're just not. Why not? Because you're not. If somebody votes for a party that you don't agree with, You're free to argue about it as much as you like. Everybody will have an argument, but nobody feels aggrieved by it. If somebody thinks taxes should go up or down, you're free to have an argument about it. But on the other hand, if somebody says, I mustn't move a light switch on a Saturday, you say, I respect that. Why should it be that it's perfectly legitimate to support the Labour Party or the Conservative Party, Republicans or Democrats, this model of economics versus that, Macintosh instead of Windows? But to have an opinion about how the universe began, about who created the universe, no, that's holy. We are used to not challenging religious ideas, but it's very interesting how much of a furore Richard creates when he does it. Everybody gets absolutely frantic about it, because you're not allowed to say these things. Yet when you look at it rationally, there is no reason why those ideas shouldn't be as open to debate as any other, except that we've agreed somehow between us that they shouldn't be. And that agreement seems to extend to the non-religious as well as the religious. Let's raise our consciousness. What's so special about religious arguments that they should be immune to exactly the same kind of rational discussion as political or any other kind of arguments? I'm offended by some things. I'm offended by chewing gum. I'm offended by backwards-pointing baseball hats. But I don't try to get a version of the blasphemy law passed to prevent people chewing gum or reversing their cap. So what if I'm offended? So what if my feelings are hurt? Does that give me the right to prevent others from expressing their opinions? However, is there a time when it is right to be offended? I think so, yes. We should be offended when children are denied a proper education. We should be offended when children are told they will spend eternity in hell. We should be offended when medical science, for example, stem cell research, is compromised by... Compromised, I should say, by the bigoted opinions of powerful and, above all, well-financed ignoramuses. We should be offended when voodoo of all kinds is given equal weight to science. We should be offended by hymen reconstruction surgery. We should be offended by female circumcision, euphemism for genital mutilation. This picture was taken in Africa, but it happens in Britain. I had a long conversation with a school's inspector from London, and she told me it's common. Girls are typically sent away to stay with an uncle in Bradford. We should be offended by stoning. This young Kurdish woman was stoned to death in a so-called honor killing because she wanted to marry a young man of the wrong religion. I mentioned the novelist Kingsley Amis a moment ago. His son Martin Amis is an equally distinguished novelist. And he made a very important point. Secularism contains no warrant for action. One can afford to be crude about this. When Islamists crash passenger planes into buildings or hack off the heads of hostages, they shout, "God is great." When secularists do that kind of thing, what do they shout? A critic of Martin Amis's book remarked on this. That question is meant to be rhetorical, but there's a simple answer. They shout, secularists shout, "Heil Hitler." What a truly outrageous thing to say. Whether or not Hitler was a Roman Catholic, the evidence is contradictory. He often said he was. Nobody could deny that Hitler's soldiers were as Christian as everybody else was in Europe at the time, and that means that most of them were, mostly either Roman Catholic or Lutheran. But even if Hitler was an atheist, so what? Hitler was also a vegetarian. Does that suggest that vegetarians have a special tendency to be murderous, bigoted racists? The point is that there is a logical pathway leading from religion to the committing of atrocities. It's perfect from religion to the committing of atrocities. It's perfectly logical. If you believe that your religion is the right one, you believe that your God is the only God, and you believe that your God has ordered you, through a priest or through a holy book, to kill somebody, to blow somebody up, to fly a plane into a skyscraper, then you are doing a righteous act. You're a good person. You're following your religious morality. There is no such logical pathway leading from atheism or secularism to any such atrocious act. It just doesn't follow. Now, it's sometimes said that humans need religion, even if it isn't true. They need the comfort of religion. I think there's something rather patronizing about that, rather condescending about it, but that's what people say. Often atheists say it. Of course, you and I are too intelligent to need religion. But what about all those poor people out there who need the comfort of religion? Humanity's need for comfort is, of course, real. But isn't there something childish, something infantile, in the belief that the universe owes us comfort, in the sense that if something is comforting, that must kind of make it true? Isaac Asimov's remark about the infantilism of pseudoscience is just as applicable to religion. He said, "Inspect every piece of pseudoscience, and you will find a security blanket, a thumb to suck, a skirt to hold." And it is astonishing how many people are unable to understand that X is comforting does not imply X is true. A related plaint concerns the need for a purpose in life. To quote one Canadian critic, "The atheist may be right about God, who knows? But God or no God, it's clear that something in the human soul requires a belief that life has a purpose that transcends the material plane. One would think that a more rational than thou empiricist such as Dawkins would recognize this unchanging aspect of human nature. Does Dawkins really think that this world would be a more humane place if we all looked to the God delusion instead of the Bible for truth and comfort?" Actually, yes. Since you mention humane, yes, I do. But I must repeat yet again that the consolation content of a belief does not raise its truth value. I can't deny the need for emotional comfort, and I can't claim that the worldview adopted in my book offers any more than moderate comfort. If you're afraid of death, for example, you might superficially think that a priest who tells you that you're not really going to die would be more comforting than a scientist who tells you it is highly implausible that our individuality could survive the decay of our brains. But I have heard experienced nurses who've worked all their lives in old people's homes say that the ones who are most terrified of death tend to be the Roman Catholics. All that guilt fed from the cradle up, and the terror of purgatory and hell. As for eternal nothingness, is it really all that frightening? As Mark Twain said, "I do not fear death. I've been dead for billions and billions of years before I was born, and have not suffered the slightest inconvenience from it." In any case, I don't think I've ever met anyone at a funeral who dissents from the view, my view, that the non-religious parts, the eulogies, the deceased's favourite poems or music, those non-religious parts are always more moving than the prayers. I want to end by reading the opening lines of a previous book of mine, Unweaving the Rainbow. These are lines that I've long earmarked for my own funeral. We are going to die, and that makes us the lucky ones. Most people are never going to die because they are never going to be born. The potential people who could have been here in my place, but who will in fact never see the light of day, outnumber the sand grains of Sahara. Certainly those unborn ghosts include greater poets than Keats, scientists greater than Newton. We know this because the set of possible people allowed by our DNA so massively outnumbers the set of actual people. In the teeth of these stupefying odds, it is you and I, in our ordinariness, that are here. We privileged few who won the lottery of birth against all odds. How dare we whine at our inevitable return to that prior state from which the vast majority have never stirred? Thank you very much.
In a recent controversy in California, a court has recently ruled that homeschooling without certified teachers is a violation of the Constitution. I wondered what your opinion is on that, particularly since homeschooling movement in this country is generally an excuse for indoctrination of children in fundamentalism.
I always have to be a bit careful when wading into local American politics, not living here and not knowing what the underlying issues are. If the underlying issue is, as you've suggested, one of indoctrinating children in religious fundamentalism, that does, I must confess, embolden me to say something which I might not otherwise have said if I had thought that homeschooling was a completely different issue. So is that really right, that the whole point of homeschooling is... No. No, okay. So what other reasons are there for homeschooling? Bad schools, okay. Okay, well, I think it's clear what I would think if it was an issue of religious fundamentalism, and it's not clear what I think given that I don't know what the real issues are. So I will retreat behind a facade of not being an American.
Hi, I'm a big fan, by the way. My question to you is something that's a little bit more of a philosophical history. So oftentimes I've heard you say on YouTube, for example, that the reason that the whole hypothesis that God created the universe is a non-starter because God would have to be more complex than the universe is. I would just like to know what your objection would be to someone such as like medieval theologian like Thomas Aquinas, who would say that God's actually something very simple but powerful, so that might be another alternative. I'm an atheist, so I don't buy something like that, but I'd just like to understand your objection to a claim like that.
It is an utterly preposterous idea that the God who not only creates the universe, which you'd think would be something you'd need to have a fairly good knowledge of physics and mathematics in order to do, not only does that, but listens to the prayers of every one of 6 billion people simultaneously, such bandwidth, forgives their sins, knows when they're thinking evil thoughts, worries about their sexual proclivities. How could anybody seriously suggest that such a being, who's capable of doing all the things that are attributed to him, could possibly be simple? If God is simple, this is really what I was saying right at the beginning when I said if you want to make God equal to energy or Planck's constant, that's fine. Make him simple. Make him the bare minimum that you need in the way of physical constants, let's say, in order to get the universe going. If that's what God means to you, that's fine. But then you're totally wasting your time praying to him. But then you're totally wasting your time praying to him, sucking up to him, asking forgiveness from him, expecting him to make you survive your own death. You cannot have it both ways. Either God is simple, in which case he's not worth worshipping, or he's complex, in which case he doesn't exist.
Hi. Obviously, religions have a vested interest in gaining more worshippers and spreading their own ideas. I was kind of surprised in the God delusion that you didn't address kind of the mimetic nature of religion and possibly speculate on the basis of mimetic immunity, if you will, to religion. You know, any correlates that actually prevent people from becoming religious.
Well, there is a certain amount of mimetics in the God delusion. Perhaps not as much as some people would wish, perhaps more than other people would wish. I think there's about half a chapter on it. I suppose the mimetic approach would be to say that religious ideas might not be deliberately crafted by cynical priests in the interests of their own well-being or the well-being of their church, whatever it is, but religions might simply grow by a kind of natural selection, not a genetic natural selection, a mimetic natural selection, a natural selection of ideas in the meme pool, ideas in the pool of ideas. So the reason why so many religions believe in life after death, by this model, would be that life after death is an appealing idea, and therefore when people hear somebody say, you're going to survive your own death, they say, oh, that's good, I'll go and tell somebody else about that. And so the idea spreads. So popular ideas that people enjoy, spread in the same way as popular tunes spread, good tunes spread. When people whistle them, other people pick them up and whistle them too, whereas a bad tune would not spread. So that would be a mimetic approach to the explanation of religion. It gets a lot more complex than that too. The idea of a meme complex, or memeplex, as it has been called. To explain that, I need to go back to gene complexes. Genes in natural selection, you know that natural selection is fundamentally all about the differential survival of genes in gene pools. The simple way to express that is to say that genes survive in the environment provided by the world, by the trees, by the predators, by the diseases, and so on. But probably the most important part of the environment in which a gene survives is the other genes in the gene pool of the species. Because it's those other genes that the genes that are being selected have to be compatible with. So that every gene is being selected not only for its ability to make a good coat of hair or a good anti-predator behavior, but is being selected for its ability to survive against the background of the other genes in the gene pool, genes which, on average, it's going to have to share bodies with. Now, maybe the same thing happens with memes. Maybe there are meme complexes, just like gene complexes. Maybe the whole of, say, the Roman Catholic Church is a meme complex. It's a group of memes which, while not necessarily having high survival value in themselves, they do have high survival value against the background of each other, in the context of each other, in the meme pool provided by the other Catholic memes. So that's another application of memetics to the study of religion. Those are both in the God delusion. Yes.
Kind of high. Good evening, Professor Dawkins. I wanted to first thank you for making yourself so accessible to the students here, coming somewhere close by that I could come see you. I also love Root of All Evil, by the way. My question to you is, there was a survey that was recently conducted that basically the results were a huge majority of people would not vote for a president who claimed or stated that they were atheist. I don't know if you heard of the study. It was conducted here in America. And it sparked kind of a controversy at my school. There were lots of columns written about why people wouldn't vote for an atheist president. And I wanted to ask you what you make of such a result and what you think about the culture of a society that would not vote for an atheist president.
It's not quite true to say that a huge majority wouldn't vote for an atheist president. What is true is that if you ask a number of things like a woman, a gay, a black, a Jew, or an atheist, atheists come bottom of that pecking order. It's not that a majority wouldn't vote for them, it's just that more people would not vote for an atheist than would not vote for any of those other categories of person. And certainly if you look at presidential candidates in this election and any past election that I can remember, it is true that candidates for election in this country seem to feel a need to mention God in every speech. In Britain, no politician ever mentions God in any speech. There was one occasion when Tony Blair is a very religious man, by the way, Bush's companion in arms in Iraq. Tony Blair was asked by Jeremy Paxman, who's Britain's most aggressive television interviewer, is it true, Mr. Blair, that you pray with George Bush? And Tony Blair jumped back like a startled cat and said, no, 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 no. But in fact, he almost certainly did pray with, I mean, he is a praying man, but he keeps quiet about it. As his right-hand spin doctor, Campbell, said, we don't do God. Well, American politicians do God in a big way because they think they have to in order to get elected, and the poll that you've quoted suggests that that's true. Maybe it's an exaggeration. I think Christopher Hitchens is of the view that it's an exaggeration. Maybe it's not. But either way, maybe it's an exaggeration. I think Christopher Hitchens is of the view that it's an exaggeration. Maybe it's not. But either way, it's up to, not me because I'm not an American citizen, it's up to you to change all that. The actual numerical number of atheists, agnostics, secularists in this country is very high. It's higher than religious minorities who have enormous political power by the force of their lobbying. I think I'm right in saying that the atheist, secularist, agnostic group is larger than any other single religious group. I think there may be one exception. Yet they are totally without influence because they are almost completely not involved in lobbying as a group. In a way, that's a compliment. I mean, it's organizing atheists has been compared, not by me, to herding cats. It is a kind of compliment, but it probably would be of political advantage if something equivalent to professional lobbyists got going. And I'm happy to say that that is now happening, and that a group in America has got together the money to pay a professional Washington lobbyist, and she's doing extremely well. And that sort of thing ought to increase. And let's hope that it does, and let's hope that everybody here will help to make that happen.
Thank you.
Hello, Professor Dawkins. I'm definitely a fan, but I'm having trouble reconciling one thing. You say that religious beliefs are basically preferences like pizza or any kind of color or something. However, you yourself preach that the faith in non-belief is an objective truth. How can objective truths in general exist in the realm of subjective belief?
Objective truth exists in the real world. What science is about is finding out what is true in the real world. For example, plate tectonics, the movement of continents, is true. it is supported by massive amounts of evidence. It doesn't mean that scientific beliefs are always true for all time, because sometimes new evidence comes in to change people's beliefs. But there always is a standard, which is evidence. And that standard of evidence is objective, it's universal, it applies wherever you're born, wherever you live. An Indian scientist, a Japanese scientist, an American scientist, looking at the same data, will come to the same conclusion. The same, of course, is not true of religious belief. The questioner asks, how can there be an objective truth in a world of subjectivity? Well, genuinely subjective phenomena like love of certain kinds of music or love of another person, there are truths about that which are not amenable to immediate scientific investigation. But that doesn't mean that there's something other than scientific events, scientifically investigable events going on in the mind of a person who loves a kind of poetry, loves a kind of music, or loves another person. You cannot necessarily prove that your wife loves you by scientific means, but you can observe all sorts of little catches in the voice, little looks in the eye, years of experience, years of exposure, and that is evidence. That's genuine, objective, real-world evidence of the same kind as scientific evidence is, even though it may not be systematic or experimental in the way that scientific evidence ideally is.
Yeah, Francis Collins was here last month in the same room and spoke to an audience which is just as big. And he said something about your book that I wrote down, and I want you to respond to. He says, Dawkins, in this book, argues that religion is the greatest source of evil, and basically at one point argues that parents who raise their children in a religious tradition are committing child abuse and should be prosecuted for it. That's what he said.
I think he might be prosecuted for libel, actually. I have never said that parents who bring up their children religious should be prosecuted for child abuse. I'm trying to raise consciousness. I'm not trying to change the law. I'm trying to say, when you hear a child labeled as a Christian child, simply because its parents are Christian, then that is child abuse. But I'm not saying that, as I actually have frequently been accused of saying, that children should be seized by the state from religious homes and brought up in state-run communal child farms. So, no, I mean, that is a travesty, and one that I should have thought Francis Collins would have risen above.
Thank you.
Thank you. Beauty isn't enough. It must also be true. And that comes, finally, to evidence. Beauty may be a good guide to the stage of science where we put forward hypotheses, but those hypotheses must finally be tested. Carl Sagan said this: How is it that hardly any major religion has looked at science and concluded this is better than we thought? The universe is much bigger than our prophets said, grander, more subtle, more elegant. Instead, they say, no, 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 my God is a little God, and I want him to stay that way. A religion, old or new, that stressed the magnificence of the universe as revealed by modern science might be able to draw forth reserves of reverence and awe hardly tapped by the conventional faiths. Sooner or later, such a religion will emerge. Einsteinian religion, pantheistic religion, does not involve belief in anything supernatural. The pantheistic God doesn't exist, except in a purely poetic sense. Of those people who do believe in a supernatural God, many make a distinction between deism and theism. The deistic God designs the laws of physics and then retires never to be heard from again. certainly not interested in human affairs. The theistic, interventionist God, there he is, he's parting the Red Sea there. He intervenes in the world, intervenes in human affairs, performs miracles, answers prayers, and all that other list of things that I gave you earlier. This is sometimes called pantheistic religion. I call it Einsteinian religion. When Einstein said, "Did God have a choice in creating the universe?" he meant, could the universe have begun in more than one way? God does not play dice was Einstein's poetic way of doubting Heisenberg's indeterminacy principle. Einstein did not believe in God. He did not believe in a personal God. He was irritated when people said that he did. But what did he expect? The hunger to misunderstand should have been palpable to him. Religious physicists, if you meet one, usually turn out to be so only in the Einsteinian sense. They are atheists of a poetic disposition, and so am I. But given the widespread yearning for that great misunderstanding, deliberately to confuse Einsteinian pantheism with supernatural religion is an act of intellectual high treason. Another example of Einsteinian religion, the Indian-American Nobel Prize-winning physicist Subramanian Chandrasekhar said, "This shuddering before the beautiful, this incredible fact that a discovery motivated by a search after the beautiful in mathematics should find its exact replica in nature, persuades me to say that beauty is that to which the human mind responds at its deepest and most profound." The American physicist John Wheeler said, "We will grasp the central idea of it all as so simple, so beautiful, so compelling, that we will all say each to the other, 'Oh, how could it have been otherwise? How could we all have been so blind for so long?'" Don't forget, by the way, with all this talk of aesthetic beauty, that's very kind. Thank you very much. I'd like to dedicate this lecture to the memory of George W. Barlow, long-term faculty member here, who recruited me here for my very first job as an extremely junior assistant professor, and was my guide and mentor during the time I was here. Can I begin with a little bit of research? The website in the middle there, richarddawkins.net, could I just have a show of hands for the number of people who've been there? Okay. Thank you. All right, that's fine. Thank you very much. Isn't it a remarkable coincidence? Almost everyone has the same religion as their parents. And it always just happens to be the right religion. Religions run in families. If we'd been brought up in ancient Greece, we'd all be worshipping Zeus and Apollo. If we'd been born Vikings, we'd be worshipping Wotan and Thor. How does this come about? Well, of course, through childhood indoctrination. One by one, those ancient belief systems have vanished from the face of the earth, and we seem to get on just fine without them. Zeus with his thunderbolts, Apollo, Wotan, Thor with his hammer, Baal, Mithras, and Amun-Ra, all were once worshipped as gods. People believed in them, prayed to them, sacrificed to them. Children were brought up with them, told of their existence as a matter of undoubted fact. But nowadays, everybody agrees that, no matter how sincere those believers undoubtedly were, they were deluded. Every one of those gods was a delusion, and so were countless other gods that human tribes have sincerely believed in all around the world. Some of us just go one god further. My book is called The God Delusion, and I need to make it clear that the God I'm talking about is a personal, intelligent, creative being, like Yahweh, Allah, Baal, Wotan, Zeus, or Lord Krishna. But if by God you mean nature, goodness, the universe, the laws of physics, the spirit of humanity, or Planck's constant, we're going to be talking at cross purposes. An American student asked her professor whether he had a view about me. Sure, he replied, he's positive science is incompatible with religion, but he waxes ecstatic about nature and the universe. To me, that is religion. Well, if that's what you choose to mean by religion, fine, that makes me a very religious man. But if your God is a being who designs universes, listens to prayers, forgives sins, wreaks miracles, reads your thoughts, cares about your welfare or your sex life, and raises you from the dead, then you're unlikely to be satisfied. As the distinguished American physicist Steven Weinberg said, if you want to say that God is energy, then you can find God in a lump of coal. But I would add, don't expect congregations to flock to your church. Earlier. There are many people who call themselves agnostic, and I want to clarify this. It's rather a confusing term. I put up here a scale of religiosity from 1 to 7, where 1 is, I know there is a God, and 7 is, I know there is no God, and we've got a scale of intermediate agnostic positions in between. 4 is exactly 50%. Number 4, agnostic, believes that the probability of God existing and not existing is exactly equal. Number 2 is, I don't exactly know there's a God, but I have a very high probability. I believe in a very high probability of there being a God. I'm a de facto theist. I can't know for certain, but I strongly believe in God and live my life on the assumption that he's there. And number 6, at the other end, is somebody who believes there's a very low probability of God existing, but still not quite 0. I'm a de facto atheist. I can't know for certain, but I think God is very improbable, and I live my life on the assumption that he isn't there. I'm a number 6. I'm an agnostic, but with the same level of belief in God as I have belief in fairies or unicorns. Bertrand Russell illustrated this with his parable of the celestial teapot. He pointed out that it is impossible to disprove the hypothesis that there is a China teapot in orbit around Earth, or around the Sun, between the orbits of Earth and Mars. We therefore all have to be agnostic about the teapot theory, but in practice we are all a-teapotists.